Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening. Iron Radio listeners are an experienced, clever lot who are in tune with their bodies and whom I'd like to crowdsource regarding a new study and an invention of mine. This is Dr. Lonnie Lowery. I've been fortunate to have a provisional patent granted regarding a coffee methodology that is research supported to either enhance the anabolic effect of meals or to support cognition in a unique way. It's not a pill or a powder, but rather a fascinating way to brew coffee that may surprise you. And that's just part of the story. This is a very early stage bucket list sort of achievement that I cannot undertake alone. If you're interested in getting further educated on functional coffee and health, I'm asking that you email me at lonman7@hotmail.com to get involved. We'll have a brief email exchange that will get the ball rolling on something I think you'll find both fun and beneficial. I need your rare combination of traits, so thank you 50 times. Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm a nutritionist, and I'm an exercise scientist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
Hi, this is Dr. Mike C. Nelson. I'm a faculty member at the Kerrig Institute and creator of the Flex Diet certification.
Sweet. All right, folks. This is going to be an episode of questions. We have a lot of listener questions, and then the topic of the day is actually going to be quick-fire questions.
More questions.
I've got a list of 10 for you, Dr. Nelson. And
nice.
It'll be fun. I just thought maybe people could pick up a little bit from your opinion on certain things. Some of it's just a little inside peek into how Mike trains and lives a little bit, but also, like, you know, there may be some recovery or supplement tips or whatever. Just professional opinion stuff might be informative as well. So, listener questions followed by quick-fire questions. You know what I'd like to do, though, to start off today? We haven't done this in a while, and something triggered this for me, but is achievements in training. Sometimes it's just fun to look back over the last couple of weeks and even the past week and, like, what have you been up to lately kind of thing. And I can tell you, the notable event for me is that I am so sore I can barely sit in this chair.
Oh, wow.
My legs and my adductors, my glutes, are so torched. All I did was up the volume, but I guess it was a wake-up call for me that I had been detrained, like this summer. Like, I'm going to the gym maybe, 2 or 3 times a week, but it's funny, if you don't log things, like sometimes during the summer I get caught up in other things, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm training pretty regularly, and I'll look at my training log and be like, oh my God, I haven't been to the gym in 3 days or 4 days, but I just did 3 sets, like 3 straight sets of light to medium weight basic movements, squat, deadlift, and bench, like 3 sets at 10 to 12. And I just got so sore all over because I think I'd been doing heavier, lower rep stuff. And just, we were talking about volume recently. Oh, my God. Just wrecked. R-E-K-T, wrecked. So... Anyway, so that's sort of, I guess it's an achievement, like I said, wake-up call for me that, hey, you're detrained, because if you can't handle 3 sets of 10, you got to change something, I would argue.
Yeah, and it's weird how that's just such a different stimulus. I know I've done that I don't do a lot of straight bar bench press, but this past year, just started doing a little bit here and there, and I did 3 sets of 10, and I was like, oh, wow, my chest is sore. And it was just such a, weird thing to go from, just a few sets of lower rep stuff. I would basically just test it once in a while and see where I was at and be like, don't do it for a while.
Yeah.
And how much you forget is just a skill acquisition too, doing those, 10 reps and everything else that goes into it. And I was surprisingly quite sore with a much lighter load afterwards.
Exactly. Fortress used to say once you have a certain amount of experience, I think intermediate or beyond, you can really rock yourself with pretty light weights. Just mind in the muscle, focus on form. How's that for alliteration? Mind in the muscle, focus on form.
There you go.
Yeah, and I think that's where I was. But anything notable happened to you in the past couple of weeks?
Training-wise, not really. My whole goal was basically just to stay about where I was at with the same stuff, with upper body stuff. So I was out in Hood River, Oregon. So we were out there kiteboarding. So I got to ride, 5 out of the 7 days I was there. So I was super happy with that. Rode my 8-meter, my 12-meter most of the time. So pretty windy days, and didn't get hurt, which is good. Didn't do as much jumping practice as I would have liked, just due to some crazy wind. And then we drove through Bozeman. We literally were in Bozeman yesterday. We drove all the way from Bozeman to Alexandria, Minnesota in one day, so 835 miles. So the gym there is funny because I've been there enough that, you kind of know what equipment to use, which ones you like, what you don't like. And my goal was just travel since this is the first time I've been home in the past 30 days. With upper body stuff was just to, try to remain about even. So I was super tired the other day when I was in Bozeman, but I did get one set of just 70-pound dumbbells at an incline for 11 reps. And I just kind of use that as a rough, I call it like a KPI or key performance indicator when I'm traveling. Mm-hmm. If I can just, keep that, and then for rows, just 70-pound dumbbells for 20 reps each side. No chalk, no straps, nothing crazy. Shouldn't be any heroic effort, and I just find if I can stay around there, which is definitely off from where my max would be, within a couple of weeks of being home, pretty close to back or, a little bit above where I was before. Didn't do much lower body stuff there. One, just due to time, and two, my legs and knees were still pretty sore. And of course they had all the equipment on that was in use. So I'm like, just do some upper body stuff and call it good.
Cool. Okay. Hey, in fact, let's get into the listener questions, because one of them, it sort of echoes what you're saying about just keeping up the key performance indicators, sort of maintenance kinds of things. This is relative to a question from last time from Seb. I think it was from last time. Hi guys, I have a question regarding the boring, quote unquote, maintenance phase. We often talk about cutting or massing, but we rarely talk about just maintaining. I've heard some stuff on the topic, but nothing extensive. I'm coming out of a cut, wondering if it would be beneficial to maintain my current weight or jump directly into a mass phase. What are the benefits of maintaining for 3 to 4 weeks? I think between phases he means here. Will it prepare my body better to go into the mass phase? What about training volume on a maintenance phase? Would love to hear you chat about that. Thanks for an awesome podcast, Seb. What do you think, Mike? Maintenance phases, how long should they last? Like, what might you focus on when you're doing so?
Yeah, I would say for that, it just always answer, it depends. And perfect world, the answer I would give them is one that they hate, which is if you've been at a plateau for about 4 weeks, I'd like to see you stay at that plateau for about at least another 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So that would give you kind of 8 weeks total. Most people don't want to do that, so I kind of need to get a little funky rearranging stuff or try to have their changes be a little bit slower. And if you look at the literature, I haven't really seen any good stuff. Maybe you have, Lonnie, on how long it takes.
No.
But my gut feeling is longer is better. But you're trying to weigh that with the psychological side of it also. And the fact that they, kind of want to do something else, so they maybe are not into it, so they're not as compliant. I think Alan Aragon has written something that his recommendation was around 8 weeks also, I think, if I remember right. I don't remember the source on that, but yeah, in a perfect world, that's where I would go and kind of iterate up or down from there.
Yeah, the part of his question that I found intriguing, the hard question was, what are the benefits of maintaining for 3 to 4 weeks? And that's really hard. If there's a benefit, I would suggest this, is you're avoiding the minefield of if you were just coming off a cutting phase, let's say that went on for 16 weeks or something, 20 weeks, I don't know, something realistic, so you got some serious fat and weight loss. A lot of the enzyme activity, like your body is just in storage mode. And every gram of everything you eat, I would be afraid that fat would be eager, your adipose tissue would be eager to grab it up. Now, I've never really seen anything that muscle tissue behaves the same way. I would think it might, but we're talking about two very different types of cells. The pulse fast thing that I've been interested in for years, and I actually used a little bit last time I competed, there was a sort of a little thing that I think TC and maybe Chris Shugart to some extent were talking about following that up with not only do the fasting, but for fat loss purposes, but acutely, like the day after, take advantage of your body's eagerness to store everything and then really overeat a lot of good stuff. With the idea that you might be even more anabolic as far as muscle tissue. I've never seen anything about that, right? So it's nice to think that if you go through a period of dieting, then your muscles are super eager and then you could jump right into a mass building phase. I don't think I would do that. Right? Because mass building phase, you're literally overeating calories on purpose. It's not just protein. I like extended periods. And I think it's so individual, which is why, Mike, you and I haven't seen much literature.
Yeah.
Like, do you wait? If your goal is to really clean up your act, like if you've been really over fat for years and you want to basically get down, let's say, into the mid-teens or low teens and % fat, something reasonable, but lean enough that you could really see your muscles and that sort of thing, I would hold it for a couple of months, to be completely honest, right?
Yeah.
If your goal has been to really lean down in sort of a permanent way, when I dropped 20 pounds last year, my goal was to sort of keep it off. And so I'm just sort of maintaining. I like what you said earlier, Mike, about key performance indicators, right? So you're going to have to decide, Seb, how long you do this. Again, I don't think the literature is going to say here is the optimal number of weeks. There's that O word, Mike.
Yeah.
But here's the ideal recommendation from the literature. I don't think you're going to find one. I would definitely wait several weeks and maintain. But I appreciate what you're saying, Mike, about psychologically your motivation. Where's your motivation to just maintain?
Yeah.
Boring, But it's cool what you said about pick some performance indicators, like where you would like to be as a homeostatic, even keel average dude. Like you said, like it might be a dozen reps with the 70s, in an incline dumbbell press, or it might be I want to make sure I can do 275 in the squat for 10 reps. Something like whatever your numbers are, pick them and make sure you hit that mark, every other week or every fourth week or whatever it is. But I would hold it for a while, Seb. But again, it's up to you and psychologically what you could take. Like I said, I think it's kind of dubious that your muscles are more anabolic after a cutting phase. They may be. I've just never seen anything about that. I have, in fact, though, seen studies that enzymes like LPL, lipoprotein lipase, it's a fat storage enzyme, sort of imagine it waiting like a sea anemone in the capillaries, in the bloodstream by your fat. It sort of extracts fat for storage into your adipose tissue. That is very active after you've been on a hypocaloric diet. So your body is eager to store fat. I don't know how eager it is to rebuild muscle. So I would, again, err on the side of caution and give it several weeks, psychologically, whatever you can do. He was saying maintain for 3 to 4 weeks. I agree with you, Mike. I would double that, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's hard because, like you said, there's virtually no literature on that. There's some debate, which we talked about on previous shows, about competitors, like post-show. Like you've talked about this being super low. Do you kind of slowly kind of go back to where you were, or do you be a little bit more aggressive and then kind of taper off? But that's not quite the same thing here, because with the competitor, that's a super acute stage and you don't plan to live there. Where here, my understanding is he's trying to, find something lower that's, going to be a little bit more livable. And by that, definition, you actually almost want to plateau, right? You want to be able to do a few other, kind of things and not gain a lot of weight, right? So I always explain to people that the end goal is that you actually want to be at a plateau, just a lower plateau than where you're at now, right? Because that's going to make your life a little bit easier.
Yeah, what he's sort of asking is body weight set point. Can you reset it, and if so, how long does it take for your hypothalamus and the rest of your system to say this is the new me? And there's just I've never seen anything any consensus on that at all. So be cautious. I guess that's your recommendation. Yeah. Maybe a little longer than you might think. Find a way to be motivated, and maintain their. I like the idea. In a sense, I know the body's always like a river. It's always flowing. There's always a flux. But I like the idea that you make something a little more permanent by holding it in place for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, next up from Philip. He says, hey guys at IronRadio, I'm a long-time listener and not so long-time supporting member. I've gained a lot of information from your shows, but I've never contacted you so far. The reason for this email is your recent bit on a mouse study showing that only fat makes you fat, quote unquote. I read typical mainstream media news article on it early last week, and I immediately thought, I hope this gets covered on IronRadio. Well, you guys delivered. It was discussed the very next episode. Now, as a sidebar, I'm going to thank Phil for that, because he brought that to my attention. I live under a rock.
Yeah.
So. I very much liked your take on it, and I just wanted to mention that Men's Health actually covered this study in a non-sensationalist way as well. And then he gave me a link. I'm currently finishing up my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology, working with fish, not mice, but bear with me, he says, and would like to add an evolutionary perspective that may not have been covered. Mice have evolved pretty much since a furry little animal survived the comet that killed the dinosaurs to thrive on a low-protein, low-fat, high-carb diet. These guys are basically built to eat grains, fruit, and the occasional insect. This is very different from what early humans would have eaten. It therefore makes sense that they handle carbs and fat and even protein differently than we do. Another thing to keep in mind is that lab mice come in different strains, which have been inbred over generations to show as little genetic variation within the strain as possible. This is vastly different from humans, so individual responses play a much larger role. At around the same time, I saw a recent review on fish oils, which, at least according to mainstream media, again, claims that not only are they not heart protective, but they really have no health benefits at all. And then he has a link here. I'd be very interested to hear your take on this. Anyway, I'd also like to take this opportunity to say I really enjoy the podcast. You guys bring great guests, but are at least as informative, if not more so, when you just talk about current issues, training, and science among yourselves. Keep doing what you are doing. Regards, Phil. So thanks, Phil. That was a very good email. I appreciate the insights. I will say that one study, and I have not yet read it, but they did use 4 strains of mice. I know, like you said, they're inbred very specifically to have a certain genetic profile, but I guess they would argue, at least, that there was at least 4 strains of mice. That's certainly doesn't address the variability in humans. I mean, God, Mike and I were just talking about that with the last question, right? There's variability in how people respond to diets and refeeds. It's just tough, So, as far as the fish oil thing, my take on this briefly is you're always going to see back and forth about things. I have hundreds, literally, of studies on my hard drive about the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, whether it's to help treat mild depression or whether it's for fat loss or anti-inflammatory effects. I think it's almost without question they have anti-inflammatory effects. I mean, literally, and it sounds like you do with your background in biology, when you're looking at substrate for cyclooxygenase enzymes, right, for the building blocks of inflammation, omega-6 fats supply that, and omega-3 fats compete, right? They're competitive with omega-6 fats for things like prostaglandin E2, which we can think of as inflammation itself, at least one form. So I wouldn't worry too much about the omega-3 things, and it depends on what your standards are as far as what makes something quote unquote heart protective, and that kind of thing. I'm definitely going to continue with as many anti-inflammatory type nutrients as I can get: curcumin, fish oils, things like that. When I was rocked this last week, I take a little extra C and E, just to sort of help the recovery along. There's some suggestion that might help. And there's also many, many studies on antioxidants as well. But the American Heart Association says they don't really help with heart disease. The American Heart Association, at my last check, says fish oils do, in fact, help with like restenosis after surgeries and stuff. So thanks for the insight about the fat makes you fat journalism. Mike, what about your take about any of this, the fish oils, etc.?
Yeah, that was awesome, and thanks for him contributing to that with the mouse expert from Evolution there. That's super interesting, so thanks for that. The fish oil, I don't read hardly anything in the media per se, because I just want to put my head through a wall. And even articles I do now, I have literally like a handful of editors that I work with, and that's about it, because I don't have time to vet new editors unless someone like you or someone comes along who recommends someone. Then I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool then. Because otherwise it's kind of a nightmare. It's always whatever is the thing that's going to grab the most headlines. So saying that fish oil helps inflammation, everyone goes, okay, yeah, I agree. That's not really that controversial. But now if we say, oh, that fish oil you're taking is crap and worthless, everyone's like, oh, wait a minute, what? This is bad? And that may be, based on just one study. You can find one study for anything. At the end of the day, with something like that, I just go back to what is the first principle that it's based on, right? Which would be, these omega-3 fats are essential, and there's a ton of data to show that, meaning we have to have them in some form in our diet because we can't manufacture them outright. And if we remove anything that's essential, some stuff's probably not going to work the way that it should. Now, what that stuff is, it's probably highly debatable, maybe a little bit different person to person, disease, pathology, etc. But there's probably going to be a lot of benefit adding that back in when you're deficient. Right? And you can do the same thing with vitamin D. If you're low on vitamin D, adding some back in, probably going to be beneficial. Is that going to add 100 pounds to your bench press? No, but it may help, right? So, and that's just then magnitude and for what. So that's, with more and more stuff I look at, that's kind of what I go back to initially. And I got that from Roger Harris, talked about that years ago too, when he was looking at some creatine and beta-alanine stuff.
Yes.
He's like, the first thing you want to look at is there any physiologically plausible reason why X should work? If you can't come up with a single one, maybe there's stuff we don't understand, and maybe you get lucky and it works. He's like, but I would argue you should probably go look for things that at least have plausible physiologic responses. Now, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be right. A lot of times you're still wrong.
Right.
But at least you're moving in the right direction, and you're working inside a framework that makes more sense overall.
That is a great point. We could do a whole episode. Maybe next time Phil is running meat, we'll talk about essentiality, right? What makes... There's essentially 6 essential nutrients, right? And this is how I design my nutrition classes. Almost all nutrition professors do. Carbs, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, water. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's not to say that non-essential nutrients can't be very helpful as supplements. As you pointed out, creatine is technically non-essential. The body can make it. But there's some interesting comments, again, from guys like Harris that suggest that, well, maybe this is a spectrum, and it's not just a dichotomy. It's either essential or completely not essential, that kind of thing. But when something is necessary and the body can't make it, you run the risk of deficiencies becoming possible, right? And omega-3 fats are something we grossly underconsume, grossly. If you don't seek them, the Western food industry is not going to supply them, right? So for decades, literally now, I've read that anti-inflammatory things could be helpful against a lot of these chronic, or subacute type conditions. I mean, I just read a paper a few weeks ago, not the whole paper, just an abstract about antioxidants and anti-inflammatories just slowly, in a non-causal way, may help reduce the risk of different cancers, right? We know obesity, heart disease, diabetes, they're all low-grade inflammatory states of one kind or another, and fish oils are probably going to help. Now, to the point about human variation, I have some very cool studies that not everybody responds to fish oils the same way either, right? Whether it's reducing their blood triglycerides or the anti-arrhythmic effects on heart, contractility, or lots of things. So people respond to these things differently, and that's why we've talked about in the past, instead of just doing a gender comparison or something like that, eventually you're going to see science move toward specific genotypes or phenotypes of people. They have a certain trait, and this study only looks at the effect of this supplement on people with this trait, right? So it's going to be a refinement in the way we do things now. I almost feel like the way I do research now is crude, because I look at either people who are highly fit versus sedentary, or boy versus girl. But it's going to become more refined than that, because it's hard to make blanket conclusions about this is good, that is good, when we're moving toward a state of individualized nutrition, at least in some ways. There are certain human truths, like different training principles, like overload or reversibility. I think these things also apply to nutrition, many of them, but there's also a lot of individuality. So,
yeah, my 30-second pet peeve on that with fish oil studies is everyone glamorizes randomized controlled trials, and I get it, and that's a very high level of evidence. I'm not disagreeing.
Yep.
But you can't take that and apply that to absolutely every single study that's ever going to be done. Because you'll see a randomized controlled trial with fish oil, they'll give them two groups, they'll split them, they'll give them 500 milligrams or some ungodly low dose, and they'll be like, it didn't do anything. It's like, well, you'd be better off testing them to see where they're at, supplementing or getting them to whatever you think is an efficacious, red blood cell content or whole blood level, and then look to see what you find. So now at least you're comparing a known level with something, not just randomize and adding something to a group. But that's, again, a whole episode.
Right on. Okay, because we have so many questions and we need to get to break, I'm going to quickly address two of these, and then I'm going to table two. So one is from the one for next week. And again, I'm doing this in chronological order. This is not order of importance, guys. So one is from Nash and one is from Mitch. These are great questions. I'm going to table your stuff till next week. One has to do with meal patterns, odd meal patterns in a client. And the other has to do with the carnivore diet. I have a former student who's interested in our take on the carnivore diet. So I'm going to table those two guys. I apologize for that, but Phil's away. Mike and I behind the scenes have been having a hell of a time. I suspect my new version of Skype is to blame. Damn you, Skype. But quickly, two that have a common thread, and because last week I put a little announcement at the beginning of the episode about the coffee project, just quickly, this first one is from Anonymous, but he says, I heard the coffee patent section of the podcast. I'd be interested in learning more if possible. I'm a supporting member if that's required. Thanks. Well, it's certainly not required, and you know who you are. It's just crowdsourcing. It's more of a project. The research side isn't something that we'll be doing with the crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing, I'm just interested in really taste testing to see what you think. I think it's going to be fun and educational, though, because I'm going to kind of send a packet to everyone, just sort of a manila envelope, and I've had people from all over the world respond to this. I mean, I was amazed in the first 24 hours. I had 24 people say, hey, I'm in. So it's going to be sort of an education on how to taste coffee, like a fancy coffee taster, and it's based on the Specialty Coffee Association sort of framework, but you'll learn how to be a coffee taster, which I think is fun. And then you're just going to give me some feedback, taste test feedback. But I thought, you know what? There's at least 25,000 downloads of these shows every month from IronRadio. So I'm going to crowdsource this. You guys know more than the handful of us can. So thank you 50 times for that. Here's the question though from our anonymous listener. He says, I know swimming isn't your specialty, but this is more of a sports nutrition and meet prep question. I was at a state swim meet with my 10-year-old this weekend. Day one, I watched the coach run the kids through 30 minutes of laps as a warm-up. I thought this was insane for a 75-pound kid. He didn't perform well that day. After that, I had him pull out of warm-ups early. He performed way better on those days. This is admittedly an N=1 experiment, but it seems to match what little I know in terms of muscle endurance, glycogen, etc. Any thoughts? Am I off base for basically pulling him out of these long warm-ups? Thanks, and keep up the awesome work. Let me offer something really quick, and then we'll get Dr. Nelson's comments. To me, swimming is one of the most endurance-abusive kind of sports that you can imagine. I mean, they purposely overreach and straight up overtrain people, and then they taper. I hope they taper before meets, right? They purposely overdo the volume, laps and laps and laps, miles in the water. Very few sports purposely have that built into their culture. So I would personally agree with you, Anonymous. 30 minutes is not necessary, right? You can literally increase the temperature of a muscle. Typical warm-ups is, local, if you look locally, like 5 minutes, of continuous activity. So a systemic warm-up, like a whole body thing, like cycling, 5 or 10 minutes in the gym, and then you go do maybe a light set or two, depending on your age and fitness level of specific movements that you're about to go heavy that day. Like, that's the kind of the lifter's way to look at that. I think 30 minutes is just too much. I agree with what you're saying, and I'm not surprised he performed better. Why drain their glycogen stores and tax their nervous system and everything else, before they're supposed to perform? It's almost reminiscent of what we've talked about in the past about people with foam rollers for like 35 minutes before they work out. It's like, get under the bar, brother, So, Mike, what are your thoughts about very long warm-ups and whatnot?
Yeah, in general, I agree. It goes back to what is the point of a warm-up, right? The point of the warm-up is to get ready to do the main event, not to gas yourself so bad that the main event sucks.
Yeah.
And, sometimes if you've, got a lot of muscle-skeletal things you're working around, I've been guilty of, taking an hour and a half to do random stuff before I could train many years ago, but I was a walking train wreck at that point, and if you're spending an hour doing it, even if all those things are helping, then you need to look at other lifestyle and lifting considerations. But yeah, in general, I tell clients, 5-10 minutes, and I usually find that the less warm-up they can do and still perform well, I view that as a good thing. Obviously, you don't want to increase risk or anything like that, but yeah, that just seems like a very long period of time, especially in that age group, and yeah, it just seems crazy.
Right on. I think the other thing, too, is I've actually worked with swim teams, collegiate, like D1 swim teams, and it was the only kind of team where, because of the team culture, and I don't know how common this is with swimming in general, but I met with them with the coach not there. Once with the coach there, and then they actually asked me afterward, can we meet without the coach in front of us, because they actually had a body fat problem. It was a women's swim team, and they were basically saying, we get so damn hungry from spending like hours in the pool. And it's worth mentioning, too, if the water's very cold, right, and you start to shiver and whatnot, you'll burn through glycogen even more. But they get so hungry, and I think listeners, when you were a kid, you swam all day, how ravenous you could be. And then they would just destroy thousands of calories in a buffet kind of thing after practice. And then sometimes there's a little bit of a party culture there. So when you add alcohol to that mix, you're not making the best decisions. And it was just very tough, Last one. This is really just a comment before we go to break. And then we ask, I'm going to fire some quick questions at Mike. It'll be fun, light, fair here with Phil away. So this is from Alexander. He says, good evening. I'm writing in response to your brief advert at the beginning section of this week's Iron Radio podcast, episode 479. First, I would like to say that I am a huge fan of this show and a rather long-time listener of several years. I'm a grad student and fellow iron enthusiast, so I appreciate your show's unique blend of research and practice. As a scientist and fellow nerd, the gang has helped me wade through the growing deluge of information out there about fitness, nutrition, health, etc. In addition to my interest in health and fitness, I'm also a huge fan of coffee, like most grad students. I would love to learn more about your project and lend a hand if possible. I've played with many different blends of coffee, amount, and brewing methods myself in pursuit of a cup of coffee that I enjoy and provides a solid boost of energy for the gym. I usually end up doing a slow pour-over method. So that could be informative there, slow pour-over. Nonetheless, I'm happy to participate in the research or the project if you still need people. Thanks, and keep doing what you're doing, Alexander. So thanks, Alexander. That's appreciated stuff. You're definitely amongst like-minded people. So, all right. Having said that, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, quick-fire questions.
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowery. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowery. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowery. You can just Google that, and I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Okay, folks, we're back. It's been a crazy morning. Mike's recording from the car. I'm sitting here in, to break the fourth wall. I'm sitting here in my gym clothes because I've really got to get to the gym as soon as we hang up. Instead of my pajamas, which sometimes I record in, admittedly. Either way, slurping coffee. We have quick-fire questions. So I'm going to blast these at Mike one at a time. He's going to answer, and then I will answer. And it's just fun, light stuff that you can listen to as you drive around or, go to the gym, whatever. Number one. By the way, let me qualify. These are not either or kinds of questions. We've played with that in episodes in the past, like chicken or beef. Yeah. Some of those are even harder because they're so close. These are open-ended, though. So just maybe you get a professional opinion, maybe learn something, maybe be entertained. Number one, desert island exercise. What would yours be?
Oh, I'd have to go with some form of a deadlift.
Okay. Why would you do that just quickly?
Basically, just it's fun. It's a full body exercise. If you only had to do one, you're going to hit pretty much every muscle group, and my body just likes it better than squatting.
Okay. I would choose squat for similar reasons. Yep. I'm cheating to say I would also have a barbell there so I could do curls or something else. So do some upper body. But yeah, for similar reasons, right? I think when you talk about the king of exercises, it's always going to be squat or deadlift for various reasons. Okay, yeah, big compound movements. Number 2, what's the worst recovery mistake that someone could make?
Oh, I guess if I had to pick one just based off of physiologic impact, so not psychological, I'm right now, even though it's kind of trendy and sexy, I'm probably going more with sleep, but oh man, undereating is like super close to that also. Yeah,
I agree
too.
I had this conversation with Kelly this morning, and I said, as damaging as undereating is, I've got to go with sleep. I said almost identically what you said. It's just devastating, right? So
yeah, and going back to the essential thing, if you don't have it, you at some point are going to die. There's actually a weird genetic disease where people can't sleep and usually don't live much past a few months once it kind of hits its onset. But yeah,
that's very timely, because I just got an email, by the way, about a parent locally who has a child with McArdle's disease, right? So he can't store carbohydrates and very poor exercise tolerance. But again, compare that to what you just said. I'd rather have poor exercise tolerance because I can't store and use glycogen well. That might be a glycogen phosphorylase deficiency. In either case,
it's a glycogen phosphorylase deficiency.
You can't.
They can't break down glycogen.
Right, you can't tap your glycogen stores, and you have poor exercise tolerance. But again, I'd rather have poor exercise tolerance than die. Right. So sleep wins. So, and it's funny that it's at the top of both of our lists, and it's what people probably abuse the most.
Oh, by far, and I know I have a multi-decade history of abusing sleep, but I've been doing much better the last 5 years, so there you go. It's much better.
Well, for God's sake, you're a heart rate variability researcher. Hypocrite. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, okay. 10 years working in the cardiovascular med tech space. So.
Right. Okay, number 3, what's your most typical gym attire?
For that, I actually go by, is it summer or winter? So... So winter, since I'm normally in my garage, I bring the bars in so they're nice and warm, which is nice. But sweatpants. This past winter, I played around with wearing some compression gear underneath, and it was more or less just because I got them at a discount and they wanted me to try them. So I'm like, oh, whatever. And then I found with like deadlifts and even some squat stuff, it just felt a little bit better. And maybe it's because of deadlift, once the bar hits your shin, you've got something to kind of pull up against, and you just don't rip all your clothes apart. And then normally just a sweatshirt and a hat, and then usually after 15-20 minutes, it's just a t-shirt and pants at that point, and it's pretty warm. Summer, just a pair of I bought a pair of shorts from Driven Nutrition, and I've kind of beat the hell out of them. I've worn them in Costa Rica, and I brought them with traveling, and they seem to hold up really well. And I usually just wear some type of black death metal-y looking t-shirt.
Gotcha. I almost always wear what I still call spandex shorts underneath my sweats. So compression shorts, you might say Under Armour now. To say spandex sounds so 80s and funny, but that's what I have them on right now. And I either in the very hot days of the summer, I'll wear some like knee-length shorts over top of them. Most of the year, I wear like almost a t-shirt material kind of sweatpants, if that makes any sense. The real light ones. They almost look like sleepy pants, like pajama type things. In fact, sometimes they're hard to find. There was a guy in the gym. He's like, I've been looking everywhere for those. Where do you actually get them? And you just have to look around. You can find them at stuff like Kohl's or I don't know. You just got to browse around. Maybe even Walmart. I don't know. But t-shirt type sweatpants. Similar with, I have like a t-shirt style super duper thin hoodie, like I just picked up at Old Navy or something. And if I'm going to go to the gym and do high rep sets, I might wear a tank kind of underneath that. And then if I get real hot, I take the thin, sweatshirt hoodie thing off. Usually I don't. But yeah, or sometimes I will wear like the black t-shirt, metal kind of shirt like you do. So.
No Zubas?
What's that?
No Zubas?
I don't even know what that is.
Oh, you don't remember the old school bodybuilders with the string tank tops with the light cloth pants with
string
the
tanks.
animal prints on them?
Oh, I didn't realize. I actually have some of those in my closet. I should take a picture of what's in my closet from the 80s. Oh, my God. String tanks and
inside.
striped spandex, like leggings, and oh, my God.
Yeah.
You know, the fanny pack, which are sort of back around a little bit. Oh, God. Okay. Number four, quick fire. Favorite meat. What's your favorite meat?
One of the best I've ever had was, unfortunately we can't get it now, but a local farmer used to raise grass-fed beef, and it was the old Highland cattle, which are kind of designed to be grass-fed, and they haven't genetically really ever been changed. And he called it a rib steak, but it was basically just a steak with they left a little bit of the rib on the end. So kind of like a leaner cut, so sort of like a sirloin. I think it's technically called a rib steak, but some chef can tell me if I'm right or wrong. And that was like by far my favorite. A super good flavor profile. Didn't taste, sometimes grass-fed beef tastes a little bit weird. I actually like it. And then the beef color was interesting. It was super just dark red, and I don't know why that was, or maybe that was just that breed of cattle, but
interesting.
That was one of my favorites.
Yeah, I got to go with that too. A really good steak. I could also go for a really good, fairly lean burger. It doesn't have to be super fatty. You know, a lot of people talk about the tenderness of steak, but you could even get a round steak if it's perfectly cooked. Or it's tenderized a little. So good. I got to go with that too. And if you make it grass-fed, probably even better. Just not to say that corn-fed beef isn't good. I know it's not as good for the cows, and it's sort of weird, but
tastes a little bit sweeter to me. It tastes a little bit different, and usually the marbling obviously is much better in grain-fed animals because of the insulin resistance of the poor bastards. But
right. All right, yeah. So I got to put steak on my list. Number 5, personal record in your favorite lift. So looking back, or this could be competitive or whatever, but mostly just in the gym, what's a PR that just jumps to your mind that you're proud of?
Yeah, I would say if I look at everything overall, it's probably from a while ago. Like my goal for the longest time was to just bench press my body weight in a competition, and then twice body weight deadlift. So that was kind of my main goal, because my first deadlift I ever did was 95 pounds, and I literally got crushed by the bar in college, which was embarrassing. So I think overall those are probably the two I was the most proud of. And what's interesting about that is that once you kind of hit whatever your kind of milestones are, it's amazing how less you kind of care about them at that point. You know, so I haven't really done much straight bar bench press since then. And I've done deadlifts, but more just different varieties of them and that type of thing, too. So those are two that jump out at me.
That's so you.
What about yourself?
Varieties.
Yeah.
I have a video, and I haven't put it online because, Fortress is dropping F-bombs, screaming at me, and, and I have to be careful what I put online. But is squatting 315 for a 20. That was
nice.
brutal. And now Rob will do it for a 25 fairly routinely, but that's what he was always good at, right? I mean, and I remember Rob outweighs me by like 70 pounds or something.
At least, yeah.
And it just, just crazy. But, when you lift around larger people, you kind of have to rise to the challenge,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he's filming me, do that. So it's like, Lonnie didn't squat deep or this or that. Well, there it is. So that was devastating for me, because I've never actually done anything like power lift or heavy, if that makes sense. But for, fairly heavy times volume, that was something that I remember. Number 6, most cringe-worthy injury that you've had.
Oh, boy. I've had a whole bunch of them, from ripped out shoulder, separated shoulder, pulled hip flexors, busted up ankle, blah, blah, blah. The two that jump to mind, I'd say the most horrific looking was, you couldn't really see my ankle, but that swelled up super big, was probably the shoulder. I was playing broomball in college when I was doing my master's, and I fell, and a guy landed on the top part of my upper arm, my humerus, and my shoulder snapped to the middle of my chest and was completely dislocated. I couldn't move my hand, and that was about it. And it stayed out for about 10 minutes.
Oh, my God.
And I went over to the side, and I was doing ski patrol at the time, and I go to the guy, I said, hey, yeah, I anteriorly dislocated my shoulder. And he just looks at me, and he sees my arm just dangling in front of me. And I'm like, yeah, I effed up my shoulder. You got to go play for me. He's like, oh, okay. And about 10 minutes after, I was like, God, I don't want to put this back in myself, because if I catch a nerve, they're going to dislocate it again. I could lose sensation. And, the doctor's 45 minutes away, because I know how long it takes them to get to the hospital in Houghton, Michigan, in the middle of nowhere at night. And it just popped back in by itself. And I checked. I didn't catch any nerves or blood vessels, no changes in color or anything like that. I was like, wow, this feels so much better now. And then I woke up the next day, and I'm like, oh, this is not good.
Oh, man.
So,
wow.
Yeah, that was 9 months before I got full range of motion back, and probably a year and a half before I got the same strength back after that. I mean, I could shorten that now, knowing what I know now, but yeah, that was probably the worst. The most painful was when I pulled both my hip flexors and my groin. I did it doing deadlifts with tight hip flexors, and then decided to do incline sprints on the treadmill. Right, so it's grabbing your leg and it's violently ripping it behind you, and I just pulled everything in that area. And I couldn't walk, I couldn't drive a car because I couldn't pick my leg up, I couldn't roll over at night without just excruciating pain. And there's nothing I can do for it, just try not to move it. And yeah, that took many, many months before I could walk, not like a geriatric penguin.
Oh my God! Yeah, that was when you told me, you couldn't even roll over at night.
No,
you take for granted you just shifting your legs across each other at night, and you just couldn't even do it.
Yeah, I had to grab the sheet underneath and pull the sheet out from the bottom part of my hip so they would drop the other direction.
Oh my God! Oh, well, there are three things that I've dealt with my whole life actually because of just getting myself into it. I think most notable was when I tore my triceps, and I've talked about that on the show before. But
I remember that.
It was very heavy isolation work. I was just doing lying triceps extensions, and it started to tear. It wasn't the popping sound a lot of people sound. I'm like, that would actually have been much nicer. This was like a wet washcloth being torn. You could hear it.
Oh.
And you could just imagine the tendon peeling away from the olecranon because it was 100% rupture. It retracted up my arm a little bit, just maybe a centimeter or two, but enough that it was weird. And I turned black from my wrist to my right nipple. I mean, I have a picture. I might actually put some of the pictures on our Facebook page. Wow. And of course the ER doc sent me home with ibuprofen and said, you're slightly strained and this and that. I'm like, you're an adult. You're adult. So I went, luckily I know some guys who are orthopods, and I just went and said, help. Help now before it scars halfway up my arm, and anyway, yeah, that would have been the worst. But my right ankle, and then losing my front tooth in a heavyweight martial arts competition was not, and I'm actually dealing with that this week too. They're having to replace an old, crown prosthetic tooth all these years later because I'm now old, and that happened when I was in my early 20s. But anyway, that was rough. It was a victorious day, so I kind of have fond memories of it. But man, my trophy is like $3,000 to repair a frickin' tooth this week. So awesome. Yeah, so lots of cringeworthy stuff. I bet Phil's got loaded with these. I almost wish he was here. Number 7, biggest middle-aged fitness lifestyle gripe. So what sucks about being middle-aged as a fitness guy?
Actually, overall, I feel generally better now than I ever have the rest of my life, which is a good thing.
Yep.
I mean, the only thing I guess if I were to complain, or I guess I could change, would be they're kind of related. I feel like for me to do well, I need time in bed, literally almost 10 hours a night, which seems just insane. And since 2011, I've tested every quote unquote hack and sleep thing you can think of, and nothing changes it at all. And kind of related to that, my HRV in general for relative to heart rate is excruciatingly low. So very higher on the stress. So my wife measured hers the other day, and she's like, "Oh, mine's pretty good. It was 88." I'm like, "What was your resting heart rate?" She's like, 73. I'm like, "Wow." And mine was like, the good day, 74. My resting heart rate's 50.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So I guess if I could change something, and those are probably just related to, I think, just exercise or stress tolerance. It's always hard because you try to not compare yourself to other people, but it just seems like mine's much lower than it should be. So again, maybe that's related to age, maybe it's related to goofy eye stuff and a bunch of other things, but yeah, it's probably the one thing I would change if I could.
Honestly, Mike, I think it may be that you're harder on yourself. Maybe that it's like with the injuries and everything we put ourselves through. And yeah, you take for granted the fact, as much as you travel and how that affects your sleep and everything else.
Oh yeah, totally.
Sometimes we need to listen to our bodies.
Yeah.
Because we're asking more than maybe we think. For me, I think middle-aged fitness lifestyle gripe is my stiffness and arthritis. I didn't have as much of a problem with it until my late 40s. In fact, you mentioned comparing yourself to others. I really want to see how you and Phil fare when you're like, because I'm 49, and I really didn't feel any effects of aging. I think in my 46th year, I started going gray. I started seeing wrinkles, like all at once. I started starting to notice minor things, but a big part of it was, my mom has just wicked arthritis, and I can actually see it a little bit in my fingers and stuff like that. And it really shuts me down, in as far as heavy lifting in the gym and that kind of stuff. It's probably good so I don't tear something else anyway. But or the other thing that kind of goes with that is, I think plus 2 days in order to recover. If I get sore from the gym, I'm not sore for 1 to 2 days. I'm sore for 4 days. I get wrecked, and I'm just slower to recovery, and that sucks. middle age woes. And you could try to address that too, like I was talking about with the antioxidants or stretching, whatever. But number 8, rate testosterone replacement on a 10 scale. So hormone replacement on a 10 scale. How good is it? What's your opinion?
I guess right now I would go maybe a 7. I mean, I think, like Phil can talk about this, and he has, that in some cases it can be incredibly beneficial. I actually just was talking to a client about this literally yesterday. The caveat I always tell people is try to figure out what the root cause is, because a lot of physicians just want to give you testosterone and go on your merry way. It's like, well, you probably want to figure out what is the root cause of it? Is it LH related? Is it, a bunch of other stuff they can look at?
Yeah.
And then the other question I always tell guys is ask your doc, well, what do you do if you ever want to go off? Because that's, for me, that's the one thing that's kind of, I guess, the bigger downside. And there's not a ton of risk factors with it per se, but I always have this weird thing where I don't really want to be dependent upon anything. And the fact that it's, you can get off of it, but it's going to be a little bit harder. So I think it's definitely beneficial, but yeah, that's why I would give it a 7 and not a 10.
I for similar reasons, I gave it an 8. Because I think there's so much good to it. I remember years ago I wrote an article and I was responding on a testosterone.com forum, and I said, listen, I think you have to think about age and the responses to it. I'm not sure an old body is going to respond in exactly the same way as a 20-year-old body, or a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you're crazy, blah, blah. I'm saying, listen, I'm not saying it's not beneficial. Probably going to help your glucose tolerance, muscle preservation, so many things. But you have to think about things like an enlarged prostate, right? Because unfortunately, the only thing that's really available for hormone replacement therapy widely is something that's so androgenic, like raw testosterone gel. But prostate would be something that you got to think about. And again, a reason it's not a 10. And it also cost. I mean, you're talking about anywhere, if insurance doesn't cover it, it could be between $300 and $800 or $900 a month to be put on gel. I mean, as opposed to injections. And that's madness. Because then, to your point, it's not just if you want to come off, but you may have have to go off cold turkey, right?
Yeah.
Because I've actually read that 1 out of 3 Americans hoard medicines when insurance is covering it. But you've got to be careful hoarding something that's scheduled like that. I doubt anybody's going to raid your house, but, you've got all this scheduled, med in your house, and you don't want some idiot trying to make it look like you're trying to distribute it or something. So I think prostate and cost are 2 things that, make me a little wary. So, yeah, I still think probably 8 on a 10 scale, though. The benefits have got to outweigh it. Anyway.
Yeah. And it is crazy that society has almost changed where now you see those commercials like all the time because companies figured out they could make a lot of money on it.
Yes. And, aging politicians decided that, hey, I like this too.
Yeah.
It's like the reason they never went after, in recent years, alcohol, because too many people do it. If they start, limiting its accessibility, then they're going to lose votes. But it's always easy to point fingers at stuff like hormones until, of course, everybody wants it, right? Yeah. Then they change their opinion. Which brings us to our next one, number 9. Most effective fat loss supplement or drug?
Oh, yeah, I just had this discussion with a different client the other day, too. And I don't know. I've been entirely underwhelmed, even within drugs for fat loss. I mean, I guess I would have to say probably some type of thyroid medication. Mm-hmm. Whether you go T3 or T4, if you're going to do it, probably just, go direct T3 and keep an eye on it. But obviously there's downsides to that too. But from what I've seen, but even then, I think it was Michael Ruscio was saying that in the literature, if you have someone who's hypothyroid and you normalize their thyroid, in terms of weight loss, I think it's on like an average of like 10 to 15 pounds or something in that. I may have gotten that wrong, but it's still not massive. But it's a lot higher than other stuff we have. There's some data on the old ephedra, caffeine, aspirin stack. It's probably more of a anorexic than anything else. It just kills your appetite, and you can move around more so your NEAT doesn't plummet when your calories are low.
Yep.
But probably one of those two. I mean, clenbuterol in humans, I think it's much higher of a risk, and the tolerance effect is so fast that the doses you would use for longer than a couple weeks are just scary.
Yeah. I'm going to differ just a little. I actually went with adrenergics as the most effective, so clenbuterol or the ECA stack of days of old, To your point, though, the huge issue with clenbuterol, because it's so beta-2 selective, you downregulate so fast and that kind of thing. It's one of those meds I wish would get more attention. I've seen it because not only does it cause fat loss, and athletes would sort of use that 2 days on, 2 days off, or 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, always trying to rejuvenate their beta-2 receptor number, or, adrenaline receptors and whatnot. I always wish it would get more attention, though. I saw a study in rehab where they dramatically reduced the time of knee rehab by giving half the people clenbuterol because it made them really much stronger. In fact, that's partly why we're doing that project with coffee and total knee replacement rehab that we have going on right now. Some of the similar effects, because if you have better contractility, and with coffee you might even get a very mild analgesia. Would it on some level weaker than Clen, basically, or a raw adrenergic drug, would it help? And it was kind of partly based on that. But I wish it would get more attention. We have an obesity epidemic, and if they could figure out the downreg thing with the right dosing scheme or something, it could be fascinating, I think, clinically relevant. And ephedra, caffeine, aspirin is all but removed from the market, of course, but you don't get quite as much downreg because it's a beta 1, 2, and 3. It's a little less selective. The problem, of course, with that is it's going to affect heart function much more, I think. Again, we're talking about effectiveness here, not safety profile, right?
Yeah,
Some people, you got to be really careful. Ephedra is a pressor med. It's going to drive your blood pressure up, especially people who are high testosterone, and they might have a greater sensitivity to stimulants, right? We're talking about things that are stimulants here, and they bring all those potential issues: rapid heart rate, maybe skipped heartbeats, insomnia, tremors, just all the stuff that goes with that. But we're just talking about effectiveness here. Quick caveat here, or disclaimer, again, anytime you look at a supplement or a drug, the two main things that you need to wrestle with, amongst everything else, is safety and effectiveness, right? So we're not going off the deep end with safety with this particular question. One thing I might add would be growth hormone. Growth hormone is such a unbelievably lipolytic thing. It's the only hormone I can think of, the way bodybuilders use and abuse it, right, with growth hormone and then testosterone at the same time, causes just amazing muscular gains and fat loss at the same time. It's almost unheard of, that kind of repartitioning otherwise. Like you said, in animals, you'll see clenbuterol do that, repartition.
Yes.
But humans can't tolerate that kind of dose, so it's mostly just a fat loss thing. But with growth hormone, just amazing. That's not the kind of thing you're going to get easily replaced by a legitimate physician like with T-gel. Which brings us to our last one, number 10.
I was going to say, real quick on that, too, if you throw safety completely out the window, you could go with, 2,4-dinitrophenol, or DNP.
Oh, my God.
Which is a massive uncoupling agent, right?
Oh,
so
my God.
Goes in
too
and
scary.
spins off free energy just massively. And the anecdotal reports are, for fat loss, it's amazing. But you take too much, you will literally cook yourself from the inside out. And even if you get medical help other than trying to keep your body cool, there's no chemical that can reverse it. So people unfortunately have died from taking it. Add in the fact that it's, not regulated, so God knows what you actually get. And the therapeutic window on it is incredibly tight. The therapeutic dose is very close to the LD50. So, yeah.
I would even say effective dose as opposed to therapeutic, because we're talking about an industrial kind of,
an industrial chemical
poison,
from TNT.
maybe. Yeah. I actually, 15 years ago, I created a little diagram. Maybe I should put that online too, on how DMP works. What it does as a, uncoupling agent, and it lets the little hydrogen ions, completely flow back and forth across the inner membrane of the mitochondria and all that.
Yep.
Just scary stuff. Yeah. Number 10 was, if you could legally take any anabolic for 4 months, what would it be?
Oh, probably since I'm oddly very risk averse in certain areas. I'll go kiteboard and do all that kind of stuff, but in terms of other risks, I'm I'm just super risk averse. Probably just testosterone. Just probably not very exciting and boring, but I can at least go back and look and see literature and see studies and have a pretty good idea of what's going to go on. I mean, I'm not trying to be my own endocrinologist, but, that compared to a bunch of other weird designer drugs that were basically just designed to get around detection. So, that's what I'd use.
I think I would go for 16 weeks of nandrolone, DECA, right? Just because it's much less androgenic. Probably less prostate problems and all that kind of stuff. The main downside of nandrolone, because I used to be fascinated with some of this literature decades ago, but was the pituitary suppression. You want secondary hypogonadism. It's real bad for that. But if let's say you're in a hormone replacement age or permanent kind of scenario, I don't see a ton of downsides to that particular med. It's less, on the side effects and, that kind of stuff, and a little bit higher on the anabolic side. It's probably something that women and men would respond to amazingly, and stuff like that. But I think
it helps with the,
anecdotally,
isn't it joint pain that's supposed to help a fair amount with too?
Interesting. If I remember right, this is not very scientific, but I think I remember also that it has some kind of anti-aromatase kinds of effects where it would do quite the opposite of something like giving you gynecomastia. So I mean, to me, it's a fascinating medication, and I would seriously consider that. Talking to a doctor about that. If he's like, here we have a new option for replacement therapy. You're 60 years old, Lonnie. Do you want to give this a try? I just might.
Yeah.
So, all right, there you have it. 10 quick-fire questions for everyone about how at least Mike and I think about some of these things. And like usual, we've gone over when Phil's not with us. So,
and the last super quick bonus question: what would be your desert island CD that you'd have to play, and you only get to pick one?
That's very tough. Desert Island CD. I would probably have to reach for one of the old Van Halens.
Yeah.
And I like when Diamond Dave and Sammy were fronting the Van Halen. I know a lot of people don't, but it would be very hard. I would pick maybe a greatest hits. I would just cheat for Van Halen greatest hits. Yeah. What would you do?
I guess if I had to pick one, especially if I'm probably going to be doing deadlifts all day on the island, also probably Demanufacture by Fear Factory.
Oh,
it's still probably one of my that CD since it's came out has like never left my gym. I actually have like 3 copies of it, which is so scary.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right, cool stuff. All right,
good stuff.
We'll catch up with everybody next time.
All right, see ya.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowery, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.